The first thing Sterling said when he walked into the dining room and found Abena sitting at the table was not hello. He dropped his car keys on the granite counter, looked her over once. Slowly, the way people do when they want you to know they're doing it. And then turned to his mother with a grin that was almost friendly. "Mom, did you hire a caretaker or a boulder?" Winifred told him to go wash his hands and not to be ugly. He went, still smiling. Abena kept her eyes on her plate. She had been in that house for less than 6 hours. She had not even met Matthias yet. She picked up her fork and kept eating. Because she needed this job, and nobody was going to take it from her over a joke at a dinner table. She had heard worse. She had heard worse from people who should have known better, and she had survived all of them. Abena grew up in Tupelo, Mississippi, in a house that was small but clean and always smelled like the lavender Lucille kept in a jar on the windowsill. Her mother worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses on the north side of town during the week, cashiering at the grocery store on weekends, and still somehow managed to have dinner on the table most nights and something warm to say at the end of most days. Abena loved her mother the way you love the one person who never once made you feel like a burden, even when you knew, even as a child, that you were. Her father had been gone since she was 5. Lucille never spoke badly about him, which Abena always thought was either very generous or very deliberate. She couldn't decide which. What she knew was that he had left, and he had not come back, and the 2 of them had figured out how to live without him, which they had done just fine. What was harder to figure out was school. Abena was a heavy child, and she became a heavier teenager, and sometime around the 6th grade, she understood that her body was going to be the first thing people reached for. Whenever they wanted to wound her, in class, when she gave a right answer, someone behind her would say something under their breath, and the laughter would scatter through the room before the teacher could stop it. In gym class, when they ran the track, the boys would make earthquake jokes when she passed. She learned to look like none of it was landing. She got good at that. She sat in the back of every room. She came home and did her homework. She graduated in the middle of her class, because by the time she hit high school, she had stopped trying to be seen and had started trying to be invisible. And invisible people do not raise their hand, and invisible people do not try. She did not go to college. There was no money for it, and Lucille never made her feel ashamed of that, but Abena felt it anyway. After graduation, she worked. Farm work in season, catering events, whatever Tupelo offered a woman without a degree and without connections. She was good with her hands. She was reliable. She showed up when she said she would. Those things mattered, even when they did not pay very much. It was Coretta, her mother's older sister, who called on a Tuesday evening in September with information about the job in Atlanta. Coretta lived in Buckhead and knew the Calloway family through their church. Their eldest son, Matthias, had been in an accident 8 months earlier. A mountain biking trail that collapsed beneath him on a trail in the North Georgia hills. A fall that should have killed him, and almost did. And now he was home and mostly unable to use his legs properly, and absolutely unwilling to accept any help with that fact. He had dismissed 4 caregivers since leaving the hospital. He refused physical therapy. He refused to leave his room. He refused, as far as Coretta could tell, to do anything that resembled moving forward. The family was paying well, better than anything Abena could find in Tupelo or the surrounding counties, better than anything she could expect without a degree. Lucille's knee had been getting worse for 2 years, the kind of worse that meant a specialist, the kind of specialist that meant money Abena did not have. She thought about that while Coretta was still talking. "I think you can handle him," Coretta said. "You've got patience, baby, real patience, the kind that isn't just waiting, it's holding." Abena said she would think about it. Then she packed a bag that same night. The Calloway house was the largest private residence Abena had ever stood inside. A long driveway with oak trees on both sides, columns flanking the front door, ceilings that went up far enough to make a person feel small in a way that was impressive rather than threatening. Augustus Calloway met her in the entryway. A broad-shouldered man in his early 60s, with a firm handshake and eyes that were more tired than his posture admitted. And Winifred came down the staircase with her arms open in the way of a woman who had been raised to make every guest feel expected. They showed Abena to a room near the 2nd-floor corridor, a real room, closet, window, a view of the garden that was still green even in the cooling weeks of October. She stood in the doorway a moment too long, Winifred noticed. "We take care of the people who take care of us," Winifred said simply, and moved on. Beulah, who had worked in the house for 11 years and ran it with the quiet confidence of someone who had outlasted everything, walked Abena through the kitchen and the supply closets and the particular rhythms of the household. She was a compact woman in her 50s with short natural hair and an expression that did not change much but communicated everything. "Matthias is going to test you," Beulah said, folding a towel as she spoke. "I want you to hear that from me before you go up there so it doesn't come as a shock. He's not always been this way. Before the accident, he was somebody you'd want to know. Easy to talk to, laughed a lot, cared about people. The accident took something from him that he doesn't know how to get back yet. So he takes it out on whoever's nearest." She set the towel on the stack. "Don't let him scare you off. He needs somebody who won't leave." Abena said she understood, then she went upstairs. Matthias was sitting up in bed with a book when she pushed the door open. The curtains were drawn so completely that the room had the feeling of a place that had decided afternoon did not apply to it. He was younger than she had expected, maybe 30, with a lean, angular face and the particular stillness of someone who had trained himself not to show anything. He looked at her, the way you look at something you have already catalogued. "Another one," he said. "My name is Abena. I'll be taking care of you going forward." "I heard." He looked back at his book. "You can go. I don't need anything right now." Abena set the tray she had carried up, water, sliced fruit, a small plate of crackers Beulah had suggested, on the table near the bed. "I'll leave this. I'd like to know your preferred mealtimes before I go, so I can have things ready." He looked at the tray, then at her. "You look like you don't have much trouble finding food," he said. She had heard that specific kind of remark, dressed differently, aimed the same way, since she was 12 years old. She did not blink. "I eat well," she said. "I'll be back in an hour to check on you." She left before he could answer. That afternoon, he called her back upstairs and asked for his medication. She brought it with a fresh glass of water, set both on the table, and watched him take the pill. Then he looked her directly in the eye and swept the glass off the table with the back of his hand. It hit the floor and shattered. Water spread across the dark tile in a wide, flat circle. He watched her face. "My hand slipped," he said. "Clean it up." Abena got a towel from the bathroom, came back, and went to her knees to collect the pieces. A shard caught the edge of her thumb. A thin line of blood appeared. She pressed the towel against it and kept working. "My mother is paying you good money," Matthias said above her, "and you can't manage a simple glass of water." Abena looked up at him from the floor. "You knocked it over on purpose. We both saw it happen." His expression shifted. Something tightened in his jaw. "I'm going to finish cleaning this up," she said. "And then I'm going to bandage my hand, and then I'm going to come back tomorrow morning and do my job. That's what I'm here to do. You can make it harder than it needs to be, or you can let me help you. That part's up to you." She stood, took the towel and the broken pieces to the bathroom, covered the cut on her thumb, and walked downstairs. She did not let him see her hands shaking. 2 weeks passed. She was still there. Sterling kept up his particular brand of humor when he passed through. Always something about her size. Always delivered with a grin that was designed to look like nothing more than teasing. Abena answered him plainly or said nothing at all. She had years of practice deciding which was more efficient. Most of the time she chose nothing at all and let him talk to the air where a reaction would have been. Matthias was the harder part. He was not always terrible. In the quieter hours he read without commentary, and sometimes when she brought his food he was deep enough into something that the hostility went briefly elsewhere. She learned his schedule before he told her, when the pain was sharpest, when his mood went darkest, which times of day to approach, and which to stay close but out of reach. She read the books on spinal cord injuries she found on his shelf, tucked behind novels, clearly bought in a hopeful moment and not opened since, and she read them at night and took notes in a small notebook she kept in her jacket pocket, because she had decided that understanding him was part of doing this job right. She changed how she moved through his days. She stopped asking him to do things and started creating conditions where he could choose to do them. She left a physical therapy pamphlet beside his water glass one morning without comment. She mentioned, once, an article she had read about competitive athletes who had sustained similar injuries and returned to something close to what they had before. She did not make a point of it. She just mentioned it and moved on. The next morning, the article was open on his nightstand. On a Thursday, just past 3 weeks in, she came in for the evening check and found him on the floor. He had tried to reach the lower shelf of the bookcase near the window, and his legs had gone out without warning, and he had been down there long enough that the exhaustion in his face was the quiet kind. Not fresh, not sharp, just worn. He was trying to haul himself upright, with the edge of the shelf, and he was not making it. When he heard her come in, his expression went rigid with something that looked like shame. Abena crossed the room without saying anything. She got both arms under his and helped him back onto the bed, took her time making sure he was stable, then picked up the photograph he had been reaching for. A picture of him on a bicycle on some high trail, laughing at whoever was behind the camera, and set it on the nightstand where he could see it without stretching. She asked if he needed water. He said yes. She brought it. When she handed it to him, he did not look at her, but he said quietly, "Thank you." She said, "Of course," and left him to the evening. The turning point came on day 22. She had just finished helping him through his morning routine, a slow and difficult process that left him wrung out and sharp-tongued before 9 in the morning. And he said something pointed about how a woman her size had no business doing physical work she clearly couldn't manage. Abena set down the towel she was folding and looked at him. "You want me out of here," she said. "You've wanted that since day one, so let's settle it properly." She held his gaze. 30 days. I do this job the way it's meant to be done. Nothing missed, nothing dropped, every hour accounted for. At the end of 30 days, if you still want me gone, I walk without a word. But if I hold up my end, you do 1 hour of physical therapy outside this room, every single day, no cancellations, until your doctor says you can stop. That's the deal. He stared at her. "You think you can hold up for 30 days? I know I can." He looked at her the way people look at something they are certain will fail. "You can barely get up and down those stairs without your breath catching." "Then I'll fix that too," she said. 30 days, yes or no?" A long silence. "Fine," he said. "Don't expect to last the week." "Watch me," she said and walked out. She woke at 5:15 the next morning. It was dark and cold outside and the neighborhood was completely still. She walked to the park 3 blocks over and started running. She made it halfway around the first lap before her body said enough. She stopped, caught her breath, and kept walking the rest of the way around. The next morning she ran a little farther. The morning after that, a little more. By the end of the second week, she was running 2 full laps before she slowed to a walk, and she could feel the difference in her legs going up the stairs. By the end of the third week, she ran 3 laps and didn't count them. She lost weight. She hadn't weighed herself in years, but she could feel it in how her clothes fit, and how she moved and how she felt at the top of the stairs. Beulah noticed, Augustus noticed. In the quiet way, he noticed things and said nothing. Even Sterling noticed, and for once said something about it that wasn't aimed to wound. "You've been at it every morning," he said one afternoon, watching her stretch after her run in the garden. "I have," she said. He was quiet for a moment, then, "Can I ask you something? Why do you stay?" Most people are gone after a week with him. Because the worst version of a person isn't usually the only version they have. Sterling looked at the grass. Then he looked up. "I've been unkind to you since you got here. I'm sorry for that." She looked at him. He meant it. She could hear it in where the words landed. "I accept that," she said. He looked back at the garden, and then, in the slightly uncertain way of someone who has decided to say a thing before they can talk themselves out of it, "I like you. More than I probably should, given the situation." Abena was quiet for a moment. Sterling was not a bad man. He was trying to be a better one, and she respected that. But the feeling he was describing was not one she had on her side of things, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. "Sterling," she said, "I think you've become a real person since I've been here. I'd like to be your friend. That's genuinely where I am." He sat with that. Then he nodded slowly. "Okay. Okay." He went back inside. He never brought it up again, and she thought the better of him for it every day afterward. On the 31st morning, Matthias was dressed when she knocked. He had not told her he would be ready. He had not told her anything. But he was sitting at the edge of the bed with his shoes on and his hands in his lap, and when she came in with the wheelchair, he looked at her with an expression she had not seen on him before. Not quite gratitude, not quite resignation, but something that lived between them. They came down the stairs using the lift Augustus had installed after the accident. Beulah was at the kitchen counter when they reached the bottom, and her hand went straight to her chest. Augustus, at the kitchen table with his coffee, looked up. He looked at his son. He set the cup down. "Morning," Matthias said. Morning, his father said. His voice was even, but his eyes were not. Abena pushed Matthias through the back doors into the garden. The morning air was cool and thin, and everything smelled like damp grass, and the particular quality of October light that made everything look just slightly more itself. Matthias looked out at the garden and did not say anything for a while. Then, how much weight have you lost? Almost 20 pounds, Abena said. He turned to look at her. You said you'd fix it. I don't say things I don't mean. He turned back to the garden. His hands were still in his lap. After another long moment, he said, I need to call the PT office today. You do, she agreed. Something that was very nearly a smile crossed his face and was gone. The months that followed changed the character of the house entirely. Matthias worked at his recovery the way he had clearly once worked at things he cared about. With consistency, with grit, with an occasional bleakness that he was learning to push through rather than stop inside of. He fell in PT more times than she could count, and each time she was close enough to be there without hovering. He let the curtain stay open. He started eating full meals and then asking for more. He began appearing downstairs at dinner time, and then in the mornings, and then sometimes just wandering through the house in the afternoons, for the simple reason that he could. He also started teaching her things. It began with a comment one evening about how she held a pen when she was writing something down for him. She had always held it wrong, gripped too tight, and she said she had never been corrected on it, and he said that was because no one had cared enough to bother. He fixed it. Then, a few days later, he showed her how to navigate the project management software he used for the family's portfolio company because she was curious and asked. He did not make a production of it. He just pulled a chair next to his and showed her. She learned faster than he expected. She made mistakes and fixed them. She asked questions that were specific and relevant. He stopped being surprised by it and started being interested. Lizette appeared more often during this time. She was a woman who had been built for rooms like the Calloway parlor, polished, precise, always with a legitimate reason to be present that turned out to have a different, actual purpose. She had known Matthias before the accident. She had not been subtle about her interest in him, and she had not been more subtle since. She came to the house and she watched Abena and Matthias in the way of someone doing a calculation. One afternoon, Winifred called Abena downstairs. The tone in her voice was careful and pained. Augustus was in the parlor. Lizette was seated across from them, arranged with the neatness of someone who had prepared. On the table sat a small velvet jewelry box, a pair of earrings, emerald drop, clearly expensive. These belong to the household, Winifred said. They went missing 2 weeks ago. Lizette found them in the hallway near your room. Abena looked at the earrings, then at Lizette. I have never seen those before, Abena said. They were found at your door. I understand that. And I'm telling you I have never touched them, I have never seen them, and I did not take them. The room was quiet. Winifred's expression was the expression of a woman who wanted to believe someone and was trying to find enough ground to stand on. Abena stood straight and kept her voice level. She said it once, clearly, and she did not add anything to it because she did not need to. She heard the wheelchair before Matthias appeared in the doorway. He looked at the scene, his parents, Lizette, sitting composed in the good chair, Abena in the center of the room. What's this? He said. Lizette explained it with the exact right amount of regret in her voice. Matthias listened all the way through. Then he looked at the earrings on the table. Those aren't ours, he said. Lizette's composure showed a hairline crack. Matthias. My mother has a pair of emerald earrings. She's had them since before I was born. They're her grandmother's. These aren't those. I don't know where you found these, but they didn't come from this house. He looked at his mother. Do you recognize those? Winifred looked at them again, longer, without the pressure of Lizette's certainty in the room. Something in her face shifted. No, she said slowly, I don't think I do. Matthias looked at Lizette. The silence that followed was a kind that doesn't need words to say everything. Lizette stood, said something about a misunderstanding, and left the room. She did not come back to the house after that day. She called once, and Matthias did not take the call. That evening he found Abena in the kitchen and said, simply, I'm sorry that happened. She said, I know. He said, you handled it well. She said, I had the truth on my side. That's a good thing to have. It was a Wednesday evening in March when he told her. They had been talking for close to an hour the way they talked now, without an agenda, two people finding their way around the outside of the thing they both knew was in the room. "I want to ask you something," he said. "Go ahead." "In the beginning, when I was the way I was, why didn't you go?" Abena thought about it honestly. "Partly because I needed the job," she said. "That was most of it at first. But also because I've been looked at a certain way my whole life, and I know what it means when someone treats you as less than what you are. And I could see that you were in pain, and people in pain say things they don't entirely mean. I didn't want to be one more person who confirmed for you that everyone leaves." Matthias was quiet a long time. "Abena," he said, and the shape of her name in his mouth was different now. Not a transaction, not a summons, something else entirely. "I think I fell in love with you the night I was on the floor and you helped me up without saying a word." The lamp on the nightstand was the only light in the room. Everything was in warm gold and shadow. She looked at him, this man who had been sealed off and furious and difficult, and then, slowly, not. And she thought about all the mornings she had gotten up before dawn to run, and all the evenings she had sat across from him with her notebook, and all the times she had chosen to stay when leaving would have been easier. "I love you too," she said. "I wasn't going to say it first, but yes." He laughed, a real one, the kind that reached everything, and she decided that was the best sound she had heard in a very long time. 5 months later, Matthias walked across the garden without the cane. He just walked. One deliberate step, then another, all the way to the far bench under the oak tree and back again, while Abena stood near the door with her arms folded across her chest and watched him. When he turned around and saw her face, he stopped. "I did it," he said. "You did it," she said. He crossed the remaining distance to her and took her hand. Lucille had come up from Tupelo by then, her knee repaired and her face luminous with the unfamiliar luxury of rest. Abena had sent money home every month, enough to cover the specialist and the surgery, and a few things beyond that. She had brought her mother to Atlanta, not because she had to, but because she wanted Lucille to see where she had landed. This house, this garden, this life that had started as a phone call, and a bag packed in the dark, because she had needed a job and refused to be afraid. Sterling had his own life to tend to now. He was serious about a woman named Adeze, calm, direct, funny in a way that kept him honest. And the version of himself he was becoming with her around was the version Abena had always suspected was available in him if he could be bothered. He was good with Matthias. He was good with Abena. The three of them ate dinner together most Sundays, and it was easy in the way that things are easy, when the hard part has already been survived. Matthias asked her to marry him on a Sunday evening in the garden, where he had first come outside after 8 months of darkness, where she had once stood and watched him walk toward her, like someone reclaiming something the world had tried to take. He did not make a speech. He said her name, and held out the ring, and looked at her with the kind of certainty that comes not from having no doubts but from having chosen, deliberately and completely, which way to walk. She said yes before he finished asking. Beulah cried in the kitchen when they came inside to tell her. Augustus poured something from a bottle he had clearly been saving. Winifred took Abena's hands in both of hers, and looked at her for a long moment and said, "I knew the first week, I just didn't say it." Lucille sat in the good chair in the parlor and looked at her daughter across the room. This daughter she had raised alone. This daughter who had been mocked and overlooked, and underestimated from the time she was 12 years old. And what was on her face was not surprise. It was something older and quieter than surprise. It was the look of a woman who had always known, and had simply been waiting for the world to catch up. The people who had dismissed Abena had done so because they looked at her and saw only the surface of things. They had never seen what she was built from underneath. The patience that was not weakness, the steadiness that was not passivity, the love that did not shrink itself to fit someone else's idea of what she was worth. Matthias had seen it, eventually. And Abena had known. From the very first morning, she laced up her shoes in the dark and stepped out into the cold and started running, that she was not fixing herself for anyone else. She was simply becoming, at last, the person she had always been capable of being, and waiting for the rest of her life to meet her there.